Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our weekly Parsha class. We are getting to the end of the book of Exodus, the book of Shmot. That means we're also getting close to Passover. The last two Parshiot are called Vayakel and Pikudei. They really detail the construction of the Mishkan, of the portable sanctuary, the tabernacle. If you're a Lego person, you can actually take the recipe that you find in these two Parshiot and build your own Mishkan if you wish. If you Google image Mishkan tabernacle, you will see very similar pictures, not because the artists have similar depictions, but they're basing it on what we see in the Torah. The architect of the Mishkan, his name is Bitzalel, a name for you to know if you want to do a little more research. We're not going to talk about him right now, but important to know who Moses appointed in terms of building this Mishkan. We are actually going to talk about Shabbat, ironically, because Shabbat and Mishkan go together. And I want to talk about that based on last week's Parsha of Ki Tisa and the golden calf, and this week's Parsha of Vayakel. I also want to mention that Vayakel and Parsha Pikudei, which will be spoken about next week, they often go together in a double Parsha, but this year, since the calendar is spread out because it's not a leap year, they are separate, so it will be 2 full weeks about talking about the Mishkan, about the tabernacle. I want to first talk about last week's Parsha of Ki Tisa, because if you were following, the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle, and the idea of observing Shabbat was spoken about again. We learn in the Torah that we don't repeat things for random reasons, meaning if something is repeated, it is trying to tell us something important. The emphasis is significant. What is the significance? You'll see in a moment that in Parsha Ki Tisa, after the golden calf, which, even though that happened in that moment, the golden calf comes up over and over again about the sin, not just of the individual, but of the people. Last week you read, for instance, that only 3,000 people took part in the golden calf, even though there were hundreds of thousands of Jews there. The importance of just one person sticking up and making sure that they can make a difference. In Ki Tisa, the building of the Mishkan is spoken about, and then it says, observe the Shabbat. But in Parshat Vayakel, and I want to read the first pasuk of Vayakel, Vayakel Moshe Kol Adat Bnei Yisrael. All the people, or Moses convened all the people. Vayakel, a congregation. Today, a congregation is called a kihilah, a meeting. Vayakel Moshe, Moses gathered all the people at Kol Adat Bnei Yisrael. Vayomer Alehem, and he told them this: Eile hadvarim, these are the things Asher tiva Adonai lasototam, that God commanded them to do. Then it says, Sheshet yamim ta'aseh malacha. 6 days you should do malacha. We'll say work or labor. Vayom hashvi'i, on the seventh day, yihye lachem kodesh, Shabbat Shabbaton Adonai. On that seventh day, we know it should be a Shabbat. We already know this from Breshit, the seventh day of creation. Why repeat over and over again? 6 days work, seventh day should be a Shabbat, a Sabbath to God. Kol ha'aseh bo malacha yumat. In fact, it says that if you do these types of labor, that you should be put to death. We're not going to focus on that piece, but we're going to focus on the 6 days versus the seventh day, and why in this Parsha of Vayakel, it speaks about the Shabbat and then building of the Mishkan, where last week's Parsha speaks about the Mishkan and then Shabbat. And I'm only going to get to that at the end because it's a philosophical reason. We're going to go through some commentaries. First, Rashi, of course, we want to know what Rashi says. Sheshet Yamim, 6 days you should work. This is what he says. It's intentionally mentioned to the people, the prohibition and reference to the Shabbat, before the commanding about the building of the tabernacle, in order to intimate that it does not set aside the Shabbat. So, here's the deal. When we say malacha, when we say labor, when we say work, often today it translates as, I don't go to my job. But it's not going to your job. Because in fact, I go to my job every Shabbat. But it is about what is work. Work are the 39 milachot, the 39 labors that were involved in building the tabernacle. Rashi is saying, you may think that building the tabernacle to God or for God is so important that it supersedes Shabbat, that keep building even on Shabbat. And Rashi says, no. It says, Sheshet Yamim, 6 days you should work, on the seventh you should stop. Why? Because even building the tabernacle, this beautiful building in deference to the divine presence, even that stops on the Shabbat. That's part one. We're going to go now to Sforno, the Italian commentator, a little later than Rashi. And he comments on the second part of the verse. On the seventh day it should be holy. What does he say? And you may not violate the Shabbat, even in order to complete the tabernacle sooner. Although the work of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, is also a sacred task. Kodesh, right? Uvayom Ashri Lechem Kodesh. It should be holy. Well, Kodesh is also referring to the Mikdash. In fact, it has those 3 letters of the root, Kuf Dalet Shin, meaning holy, actually means separate, but we can talk about that at a different time. On the seventh day it should be holy. Sforno is emphasizing that, yes, even though building the tabernacle is holy and Shabbat is holy, we do not build the tabernacle even on Shabbat. We're going to keep moving through the commentary so you can see the common theme. Chizkuni goes back to what Rashi was commentating on, the 6 days. Sheshet Yamim, during the 6 days. He's focusing on why is this repeated and repeated. He says the Torah repeats itself so as to make clear that this rule applies also to the work on the tabernacle. 3 commentaries, 3 different generations. Chizkuni and Sforno knew Rashi, but they have to say and emphasize it's so important that even on Shabbat, you do not do this holy thing because the Shabbat must be that holy. We're going to keep moving on to the Orach Chaim, which is more of a mystical commentary. Let me get it out here. And this is what the Orach Chaim says. This is more about what happens when you observe Shabbat the rest of the week. The question is Shabbat the beginning of the week or the end of the week? In the story of creation, the narrative of creation, it's the 7th day. God works for 6 days, and God either rests on the 7th day or God created the day of rest, which I think is a beautiful thing because often we rest when we are tired, but we don't rest when we necessarily don't read it, right? Whew, a yawn because I'm speaking about malacha, about rest. 6 days of labor. Orach Chaim says, the reason the Torah emphasizes the work for 6 days to be performed during the weekday may simply be a hint that if one observes the 7th day as a holy day, the work required for our maintaining ourselves during the subsequent 6 days will take care of itself. He says, if you observe the Shabbat, then the next 6 days will sort of flow. Taking those moments of menucha, not milacha, but minucha, of rest, is truly, truly important. It's not saying do Shabbat and work, you don't have to worry about work, but it'll saying you will bring Shabbat into the week. And in fact, when you get to the end of that week, then you will bring in the menucha again. Again, connecting the Shabbat to those actual 6 days of work. We're going to go to one more commentary called the Tur HaAruch. Tur HaAruch. It's more of a law code. And he focuses actually on that last part of the verse, Kol ha'aseh oseh bo malacha yumat, that if you do labor, then you're put to death. He says anyone dealing with performing forbidden categories, even if the person concerned was busy doing work sanctioned by heaven, it does not take precedence over the legislation governing the rules of Shabbat. It does not take precedence over the legislation governing the rules of Shabbat. Right? Even if it is God that has told you to do that work, you still do not do that work because Shabbat comes first. As you can see, this focuses of Shabbat, but I now want to speak about why last week Shabbat comes after the building of the Mishkan, and this week Shabbat comes before. We learn that also when the Torah writes about Shabbat, it writes that Moses had a light on his face. What does this teach us? That God also gives light to each person on Shabbat, that each person has a grace on their face. I think it's true. If you've experienced Shabbat, you can't describe it. If you ask somebody or you tell somebody about Shabbat, you can tell them as much as you want. Until they experience it, then they won't understand that light, that grace, right? Sometimes my children will tell me on a day off or on a different day, hey, it feels like Shabbat. And I say, what does it mean to feel like Shabbat? And then they'll explain that Shabbat feeling that we all have. In fact, in the preschool every week we sing, I have that Shabbat feeling deep in my lev, deep in my heart. We only know the Shabbat feeling by having that lived experience. It brings a light to us. Even in the most darkest of times, it brings that light. Building a temple, right? Building the Mishkan, the rabbis teach, is a sanctification of human labor. Building the tabernacle, it takes a lot of work. When I go to Jerusalem, when I go to the Kotel, when I see those ancient, gigantic stones, there were no cranes like I see in Century City or in Tel Aviv today. This was a lot of work to build this temple, to build the sanctuary. It's a sanctification these human beings were doing out of labor of love of God. And stopping to work, even on the acknowledgement, even on the Mishkan for Shabbat, it is acknowledgement that we have an allegiance to God. We know that we can have a sanctuary anywhere. Shabbat doesn't stop if we do not have a building. Shabbat continues. Our conversation, our relationship with God continues. Shabbat serves, therefore, as a preparation for the work of the Mishkan and not vice versa. That's the difference between the generation of the golden calf and after. At the golden calf, Shabbat was an after we work, then we get that day of rest. We sigh. But Shabbat, in this case, building the tabernacle, Shabbat prepares us for the next Sheshit Yamim Ta'aseh Malacha, for the next 6 days. It's interesting. Again, I was in Israel just last week. At the end of Shabbat, it's like an instant. The buses are back. Everybody's back. But that Friday, you almost hear the hum, like almost like a power outage. It's like, Shabbat is not the end of that week in this case for Parashat Vayakhel, but Shabbat is only a preparation for the work that we will do. It's a very minute difference, but it is a beautiful philosophical difference. A beautiful, beautiful philosophical difference. Because when we do that, and actually, the next sentence, by the way, after the 6 days of work and the build and the observance of Shabbat, we read Lo teva'aru eish b'chol moshoteichem b'yom Shabbat, that you shouldn't light a fire on the Sabbath day. That's how we get the prohibition of cooking. Why? The rabbis teach the consuming passion should be removed from the physical dwelling place. Why are we commanded not to light a match? Because we want to take out that consuming passion. The rabbis say only then can we unite with our neighbor and build a Mishkan. Hopefully you can see this deep spiritual connection between Shabbat and between the tabernacle. Yes, we want to build that tabernacle. It's important. But let's remember what happened with the Tower of Babel. We built it so big, so high, we never stopped building that it just came crashing down. That's not the Mishkan. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, is a house of dwelling, as we read a couple of weeks ago, Vasuli Mikdash Shechandi B'tocham. You should build for me a sanctuary so that I, God, will dwell within, not it, but within you. That is the purpose of the Mishkan. When we visit sanctuaries around the world that are empty, they're no longer Mishkans, they are just empty buildings. But we know the presence when we feel that in a Mishkan. We know the presence of a sanctuary when it is there. And when it is connected to the most holiest day of the week, when it is connected to the most holiest time where we have a relationship with God, then it truly becomes a sanctuary. There's a beautiful article called Sanctifying Time and Space, Shabbat and the Building of the Mishkan. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel writes, Judaism is a religion of time and a sanctification of time, not place. Judaism teaches us to be attached to a holiness in time, to be attached to sacred events, to learn how to consecrate sanctuaries, emerge from the magnificent stream of a year. The Shabbat is our great cathedral. Our Holy of Holies is a shrine that neither the Romans nor the Germans were able to burn, a shrine that even apostasy cannot easily obliterate. The sanctification of time makes Judaism portable. That's what a Mishkan is. The Mishkan traveled with the people and turns us away from an overemphasis on the building of buildings that honors the builders more than the creator of the universe. We shouldn't honor the builders, but we should honor the person that builds the universe. In Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, a beautiful midrash, it says, in 10 asara mamarot, in 10 sayings, the world was created. And in 3, it was finalized. How were they finalized? Chokhmah, wisdom, tivuna, ability, and da'at, knowledge. As it is stated, the eternal God with chokhmah, with wisdom, founded the earth. By tivuna, with ability, established the heavens. By God's da'at, by God's knowledge, the depths were split asunder. With those same 3 terms, the Mishkan, this tabernacle, was made. As it states about Bezalel, the architect of the Mishkan, I have filled, we just read in this Parsha as well, I have filled him. What did God fill him with? The Spirit of God, Ruach Elohim, in Chokhmah, Tivuna, and Da'at. The same 3 qualities that the temple in Jerusalem was built. His mother was from Naphtali, his father was from Tyre, which is Akko, and he was filled with Chokhmah, with Tivuna, and Da'at. The same 3 sayings that the world was created are the same 3 pieces of gifts of ability that the tabernacle was created. And so I would ask for us, how do we bring those 3 ideas of chokhmah, tivuna, and da'at, of skill, ability, and knowledge, into our own worlds, to build our own, not necessarily physical sanctuaries, but our families, our communities. If you go into your community with the ability, with the ideas of chokhmah, of tivuna, and da'at, I believe that community will be a better place. Imagine if everything that you did on a committee, in a school, in a synagogue, was based on your Ruach Elohim, your Spirit of God. Then that would be a beautiful, beautiful place. The world is constructed, this article says by Peter Noble, by God as a gift to humankind. We are living a gift. The Mishkan, he says, is a gift to God, built through generous contributions and skilled labor to welcome the divine presence. Both Shabbat and Mishkan are manifestations of religion. And finally, Aviva Zornberg, one of the great commentators of this century, writes this. We began with the counter realities of Shabbat and Mishkan. It doesn't make sense. Shabbat and Mishkan, why are they next to each other? Of a condition in which fire, a medium of the Mishkan achievement, may not be kindled on Shabbat. Perhaps we may now say that these 2 modalities represent 2 ways of living time. Fire represents the urgency of productive time, lived for its objective creations, for the forms of self-knowledge that evolve from inner heat. The work of the Mishkan then stands as a testimony to the creative power of the people, to the many ways, the 39 ways, of relating to the world and transforming it, in which fire is essential. This work is at base a manifestation not of the kind of objects in space that are created, but a way of using time, purposefully, productively, often ruthless. As against this modality, there is Shabbat. You shall kindle no fire through Shabbat. Shabbat is virtually defined as non-fire, as time not used, unproductive, the shadow opposite of making of the Mishkan. Finally, God is invited into our lives through Shabbat, and God is invited into the world through the creative work. All of the skill, ability, and knowledge that were required for building the Mishkan are what we must bring to our work day. Everything that we build to our Mishkan is what we build for our work day. As the Mishkan and the world each had a divine plan, we should strive to create lives that reflect our desire to participate in the divine plan. This requires sanctifying time and space. The path to sanctification from Torah study, which connects the human and divine, transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary, as we recreate the world for 6 days. But on Shabbat, you remove that fire. You remove that production of the workplace, and you have that day of rest. And so I hope this week we've given you a new meaning of Shabbat, connected to work, connected to the building of that sanctuary. They are two separate ideas, but they go hand in hand. If we go into Shabbat not understanding the work that we have to do, then what is Shabbat? But if we go into Shabbat without reminding us that we have to remove that workday atmosphere, then again I ask, what is Shabbat? And so we pray that in this hectic week, as always, Sheishet Yamim Tasei Melacha, work for those 6 days. Work with the abilities, work with the skills, work with the knowledge, work with the wisdom. Breathe on Shabbat. Take it in. Acknowledge what you have built and work on that relationship with the divine.